Welcome to our HX webinar today. We are here to talk about our Northwest Passage expedition. And it is my pleasure to turn it over to Tudor Morgan, who will lead us through this wonderful discussion today. So Tudor, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you very much to Verena for the translation. My name's Tudor Morgan. I work for the part of the operations team in HX, and I'll be guiding us through along with some of my colleagues, which I will introduce shortly. Just for information, we had 749 registrations for this webinar. So we've got quite a few of you listening in, and those that aren't listening, I know with time zones, watching the recording afterwards. So great to have you in the call and to be able to share some of our experiences and give you an introduction to the Northwest Passage. Very aware that you've sailed with us, or many of you have sailed with us before. So we're not going to sort of do a big sales pitch on HX, but just a little bit at the start, just that we feel we're very much on our ships and our expeditions that we do provide that perfect balance of adventure, comfort and sustainability. And with that, we mean that on the side of adventure, we really have that expedition experience and expertise. Our ships are made fit for purpose. We really have put together a program that keeps you busy and gives that real in-depth enrichment in the area we sail. What may have changed since you sailed with us, we are now all-inclusive. So when you're on board, you really don't have to dip your hands in your pockets, except for maybe some shopping and some massages. But the ships are really incredibly comfortable. Sustainability is really important to us, and we do everything we can to reduce our impact and emissions and really aim to have a positive impact. And we'll hopefully bring out some of that in our discussions here between the team. The team that we have presenting, obviously I've mentioned myself. I feel a bit of an imposter based in the UK, along with two of my Canadian colleagues, Alex McNeil, who's our Chief Expedition Officer, and also John Chardine, who we've worked with for many years. John has now recently retired, but has very much agreed to share his years of experience working in Arctic Canada with us today. The aim is that we'll have a sort of a chat between the three of us, and we'll try and bring out the main points. Thank you all very much for all the questions that you sent in before the webinar, which has sort of guided us in how we present and what we share with you today to try and answer those questions. But as Lee said, we do have a team in the background answering questions. So please do put things in the chat, and they'll answer things as we go, and we'll pick up the main points at the end for those areas. So one of the really big things we get asked is what is the Northwest Passage? And as you probably know, because you've been looking at our website in preparation for this call, we do two sailings, one from east to west and one from west to east, going across the top of the Americas. But I'll bring in Alex now. So Alex, what is the Northwest Passage?
Oh, it's an interesting question, Tudor. And for me, it's this labyrinth of islands that has just intrigued the human spirit of exploration for centuries. And you can see why just looking at this map. It's an aspirational passage that has never become commercial, but in a commercial shipping lane sense, because of the ice and because of the difficulties of navigation. But it's definitely captured the imagination of explorers throughout the ages and into the present day.
Fantastic. And John, how about for you? What is you've done the trip a few times. What does it bring out for you?
Yeah, I actually started working in the Arctic back in the mid 80s, and it was more or less on the Northwest Passage right there. If you can look up to Dundas Harbor there and Devon Island, the biggest island, uninhabited island in the world, and then coming down the the eastern side of Somerset Island. That's where I worked for years. And in those days, you didn't see many ships at that time of year, August, because there was still a lot of ice. But just one thing for me to say, just looking at it here, is there are many routes through the Northwest Passage. And if you ask the average Canadian what the Northwest Passage is, they won't know either. They'll just draw a line right the shortest distance between the Atlantic to the Pacific, not realizing that there's a very special route that you have to take through the Northwest Passage. And essentially the one that we've plotted right here on the map is the one that takes advantage of the least amount of sea ice statistically. And that's where most of the explorers have tried to go as well, to increase their chances of getting through.
Yeah, fantastic. And Alex, you're a bit of a polar history buff, in terms of, this route and, following in the explorers of Amundsen and others. How many, how frequent is for ships to make this journey?
Yeah, so John's more of the environmentalist biologist take on it, but I'll give a historical perspective. So there are actually 7 variations of routes that you could go, or that people have been through the Northwest Passage. The one that we've chosen, partially because of the sea ice, but also because of its association with these historical expeditions. So Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer, was the first to make it through the passage successfully in the early 1900s. And since then, on that route, in either direction, only about 50 vessels have achieved that same route. And when you extract, Coast Guard vessels or sailing ships, a few tankers that have experimented going through, the exclusivity of this route is really significant. In the whole polar portfolio, I mean, I've done almost 200 expeditions over the better part of 2 decades, including about 15 through the Northwest Passage itself. This is still the most exclusive, the most coveted route in all of the polar exploration industry. There's likely, our estimates are that there's fewer people that have sailed this exact route than have stood at the summit of Mount Everest. So I'll leave it at that for inspiration.
Yeah,
it really is. It's one of those the holy grail of exploration, isn't it? And I think when you look at this map, and you look on the Greenland side, you can see the labyrinth of islands and the landscape, and we'll talk about that in a bit later. But as we get to Alaska, it's a lot more open. The Canadian or the Alaskan, the North American slope. And I think part of that, one of the questions is, this is a long voyage. When Amundsen did it, it took him just under 3 years.
yeah.
We're aiming to do it in, I think, is it 22, 23 days, Alex? So around that region.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things the questions that we get is, it is a long journey. We do have to cover quite a bit of ground, but in that we have a lot of program. On the area in Alaska, whether you start in the west and go east or vice versa, the area around Alaska, we do have quite a bit of time at sea. And people say, what do you do on sea days? And maybe we were chatting before and we asked John this question. And John, what was your answer to sea days?
Well, I'm a bird guy, but I'm interested in nature in general. And for me, a sea day is like a highlight. So I don't think of it as a down day or a day with nothing to do. In fact, there's tons to do. Of course, there's lots to do. There's a full onboard program inside in terms of lectures and science center and all those sorts of things that HX does. But outside, for me, is the real highlight. And, if you take a look at that straight line going towards Point Barrow there on the north slope of Alaska, we're not actually landing there, but that is such an amazing place for example, bowhead whales. When I was there in 2019, I think we had great conditions, visibility, and we saw quite a few bowhead whales. And these are amazing Arctic ice associated whales. The bird life is amazing there too. For any birders, the Ross's gull is sort of the holy grail, and that is one of the main areas where they migrate. A little later on in the year than we will be there, but there's always a chance to see them. So lots of interesting things to do on deck. And of course, we're always on deck. We have naturalists on board on deck, watching for whatever we go by. So it's a great time.
And I think one of the things for me is that, one is that preparation, reflection time as well, but also we, as part of the team, which again we'll talk about a bit later, our cultural ambassadors, and I'll bring you in later on that, Alex. We do have a big program in learning on those sides, and this this to sort of illustrate the point. This is more on the eastern side, on the I'm going to call it the Greenlandic side of Arctic Canada. This is the type of landscape that you can see. And then I think, just to move on in terms of the history and one of the places we go, and maybe, I can bring in Alex again. This is Joe Haven, of course, one of the wintering places of Amundsen on his voyage through. How do we work with the community here in terms of delivering and sharing our history? And
yeah, this company has the greatest historical associations of any in this industry, and many on the call will have lived that themselves. I mean, I've been studying polar history for a while now, and I always revered Amundsen and Nansen, and of course they're the namesakes of our two flagships that are sailing this route. And they were amongst the first European explorers to acknowledge the innovation and just ingenuity of the Inuit people that called this place home. And we carry that legacy forward. We're inspired by them. They're more integrated into our program than any company of our scope. And that's something that we really amplify in the experiences that our guests can have in these communities. We're not just coming by and taking photographs and wandering their streets. We're integrating, we're developing relationships, we're providing access to our guests to those relationships. And I'll do a little teaser further down the line of some of the projects that we have in the pipeline for the years ahead in this regard.
Brilliant. And John, you spent quite a bit of time at Joe Haven. I know when we were working together in preparing for voyages, and the relationship with the communities is really, really important. And I know somebody else are in your trying to fill your big shoes doing that now. But how do we go about setting up a visit at somewhere like Joe Haven?
Yeah, I mean it's a super important process, and it starts several years before we ever actually visit the community. Most of these communities in the Arctic, with only a couple of exceptions, there's 25 communities just in Nunavut alone. Most of them have fewer people living in these communities than we have on board our ship. And our ship is only has 400 to 450, something like that. So, we're very aware of that, we could, if you visited a place like Joe Haven, you could easily inundate the community without if you weren't welcomed there. And so the process of being welcomed is a relatively long process of getting to know local people, certain key people, of course, the economic development officer and others in the community, visiting the community itself, spending time in the community. And I used to do that, and I'm sure we still do. So really that's face-to-face. Inuit are very much face-to-face people. You need to get there and you need to talk to them face-to-face, and that's where you develop the trust.
Yeah. And that's, that trust and those relationships and being able to go back to these places year after year are kind of, super important. And Alex, part of that is not just a one-way conversation. It's also for the community to see us and be on board and experience us. What's going on here in this picture?
This is actually from last year on Roald Amundsen, where we had over, in total along the route, there was over 10 community members that joined at various stages and contributed their stories about life in the North. And I actually was on a call the other day with a number of community partners, and they pointed out that a lot of people are attracted to this part of the world because of the route itself, because of the passage, but then are pleasantly surprised when they realize that this area is a destination in itself. there are people who travel just to go to Pond Inlet or Joahaven and spend a week there. And so it's kind of a surprise and delight for our guests when they realize the incredible beauty of these cultures, when they hear the stories firsthand from people in the middle there in the red parka is Martha Flaherty, who's a very well respected elder. John, you know her, you brought her on board.
Yes.
And yeah, just being able to hear these stories and bring the destination to life through human voices and the human experience is really motivating, and something I think that we do better than any other company.
And I think, for me, those cultural exchanges and the warmth of that connection with the people in the community is a real highlight of the journey, and it is a real journey. And when I was lucky enough to go through in 2019, how the identity of each community. Obviously, we aim to visit numerous places, but it is an expedition, so conditions do dictate. But the identity and the difference in every community is striking, and you just get there's a different feel from every place we go, and we really try and bring that out in with the work that Alex and his team do with those things. And of course, I think very much part of any expedition, the Northwest Passage voyage in itself is incredibly, in the footsteps of the explorers. The relationships to the communities are really important. But one of the really common questions is, what's the wildlife? Are we going to see wildlife like we might have done in Antarctica or in Svalbard? And of course, we, in materials, we do see a lot of these lovely pictures of different terms of different wildlife. They're all living there, but you've got to be there, and you've got to be looking. Every expedition team member says, "What bit of kit should I not forget to take?" Is binoculars. But some, exactly, Alex. Some of the species like narwhal are incredibly sensitive to noise. That big unicorn's tusk or their tooth is a big noise sensor. So any noise from a ship, they really sort of disappear. So they're very, very shy. So if we do see a narwhal, we'll be very, very lucky. But I know, Alex, you were on board last year, and you told us quite a few stories about polar bears. Would you like to say a bit about that?
Yeah, it was astounding. I was on board Nansen, and in I think it was 5 or 6 days that we spent in the area in between Pond Inlet and Joahaven, we had well over a dozen bears. And some were at a distance, definitely utilizing binoculars, but some were quite close to the ship. And Bellot Strait, for example, the northernmost point of the North American continent, where there's a very narrow and scenic channel. It was like we were watching 3 different groups of bears at the same time from the ship. And this passage is less than a kilometer wide, and it had sea ice floating in it. So I would definitely say, in my experience, in our portfolio, the Northwest Passage is probably only closely behind Svalbard when it comes to a great destination to see bears. That opportunity doesn't exist throughout the whole route. It's not every day that you have that opportunity, but certainly in that main congregation of islands, the kind of labyrinth that makes up the majority of the route is a fantastic habitat for polar bears.
And John, you mentioned earlier, you're a birder, and I remember when we were on board in the Bering Strait, the volume of birds there. But the wildlife, to me, I love the Antarctic. Well, I love all polar regions, but I've spent a lot more time in Antarctica than elsewhere. But the wildlife concentrations in the Northwest Passage are a lot lower. But there is wildlife there. But what's your sort of take on what prospective guests could see?
Yeah, certainly polar bears. I mean, Alex said it all there. And just to mention there, I mean, everyone on board, from the officers on the bridge to the crew to us, the expedition team, have polar bear in the back of their minds or in the front of their heads when we're in the Northwest Passage. And so we're behind the scenes. It may not look like it, but we're working really hard to find them and to show you polar bears, show the guests polar bears. So it's not something, so we put a lot of time and effort into it. And that brings up a point that in terms of And it goes back to what I was saying in terms of sea days, and the great opportunity to be on this amazingly comfortable platform, but out in these incredible places, out on deck, watching and looking for marine wildlife, whether it be seabirds or cetaceans, whales, or whatever, polar bears. It's all about putting the time in. And so, and that's not hard, because if you really want to see a beluga or a narwhal, you've got to put the time in. You could be lucky, but there's a direct correlation between how much time you put into watching versus the chances of actually seeing them. So, and we help you with that. Dress warmly, be outside on deck with our naturalists, and you're increasing your chances for sure.
And you can tell John's a birder because he's got red cheeks because it's the winter. So he's like, we're covered up, and the only bit is exposed to the red cheeks and the binoculars.
Yeah.
No. But it is there are opportunities to see, but when a seal pops up, it pops up quick and it goes down quick. So you do have to be seeing. But the combination of the heritage, the communities, and the wildlife, I think, is really do that. Really sort of bring it out. And I'm going to ask some your top memories and experiences. And we asked you both for some slides, and so I'm going to move on to you, Alex, to just talk about your favorite or your highlight experience to share with us all.
Yeah, this is a great image. This is Pond Inlet on the eastern side of Nunavut, at the northern point of Baffin Island, and these communities are remote. They're kind of outposts on the frontier, on the doorstep of these great wildernesses, still embracing traditional values, still going out harvesting, hunting, and they're nuanced. So it's a great privilege to be able to go to these places, but how you go and more importantly, who you go with can make a world of difference. And if you go to the next slide, Tudor, this is from last summer with my friends from Pond Inlet, Michael on the left and Mariah on the right. And this is when I arrived, and Michael rushed down to the dock with a cup of coffee there. Tim Hortons, John will know what that is, maybe a few others on the call. A cup of warm Tim Hortons, and it was just the warmest welcome. Not only as a company do we embrace these kind of community partnerships, but we also have a foundation, the HX Foundation, that supports local projects. Actually, one of the projects that I work on with Michael and Mariah is funded by the foundation itself. And these are relationships that carry through into the experiences that we can provide to the guests who choose to travel with us. They're not kind of superficial walkarounds of these communities. What we're aspiring for is being able to create deep connections and replicate and amplify the relationships that we hold, that people like John, myself, our expedition team members hold with people who call this place home. And so the teaser that I was going to give is we've actually been, John and I started it over a year ago. One of the things about us as a business is not only our values, but also using the capacity of our ships and the mindset of our guests to pioneer new experiences. So in 2025, we hope to initiate an industry-first program of local integration where people can engage with community members on a very intimate level, as few as one community member to four guests, having conversations, learning about what life is like. And as I was saying, it's such a privilege to be able to go to these fantastic places, but to be able to get to know people on a personal level just amplifies it that much more. So that's something that's always been really close to my heart.
The smiles say it all.
Yeah.
And what's going on here, Alex?
Yeah, so to contrast the community experience, as I said, these communities are on the doorsteps of these fantastic, and majestic wilderness. This is actually a picture I took from a plane flying from Munich to Vancouver a few months ago.
Fantastic.
And I was at the window seat, and I looked out the window, and this was literally an area that I'd been exploring for decades, just laid out in front of me. It was a beautiful sunny day, so I took this picture. I quickly annotated it with putting in the labels there of the places that maybe one day we'll return to. And this just gives you an idea of the scale and kind of immensity of the destination. It's super rugged, unlike what we experience in most of our day-to-day lives. And you kind of transcend into this wonderland of like a storybook fairy tale landscapes. And if you go to the next slide, Tudor, zooming in a little bit on what that looks like closer up, this is Croker Bay, a small fjord on the south coast of Devon Island. And you can just see these towering glaciers cascading to the sea. And MS Fram there is almost dwarfed by the glacier front. And this is a place we like to visit, to go zodiac cruising, to go ship cruising. Sometimes you'll see walrus hauled out on the little pieces of glacier ice there. And this is just one of many fantastic sites along the Northwest Passage route that brings that kind of the immensity of the landscape to life.
Yeah, it really does. And I think you mentioned a good point by showing a picture or having a picture with Fram in. One of the questions were, you know, why is Fram disappearing from the Northwest Passage itineraries or the half Northwest Passage? But in the following years, we're using Armonton and Nansen, and Fram is doing some other exciting itineraries. So we're just diversifying a bit. So Armonton and Nansen for the next coming few years will be the ships doing the full transits of the Northwest Passage. And with that, to sort of a contrast, this is I put a picture in here. This is Smoking Hills, which is over in the Yukon Territory, right over in the west. And for me, again, we were coming, and if we're lucky enough, this is quite a sacred site for the local Inuit. So we can't land, but we can small boat cruise, and we were really lucky in 2019. John, you'll remember when the conditions when we came closer here, and this is lignite in the rocks that has been slowly smouldering away, producing these incredible strong noxious smells. Luckily for the day we were there, the wind was going the other way, but just the scale and the size of this area just was really just grabbed me, and that smell and that experience for me, you know, whenever we're looking at Northwest Passage itineraries, I just really hope that the ships can get in and experience this, and all our guests can experience it, because I can still smell it now. It's just really magic. And John, we're going from fire to ice, I think.
Fire to ice.
Yeah, it's an old picture. This is like why John's retired now, because this is when we were using Polar Circle boats, John.
Yeah, this is in the old days a little bit. There's Fram in the distance there, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about something we do opportunistically, and it does require there to be stable ice flows within our reach. But what we do sometimes is we actually land on one of these ice flows. And here you can see us, we're anchored off a good ice flow. And what we do before, what I haven't shown you pictures of, is a lot of work, probably an hour of work at least by our expedition team goes into making sure that the flow is stable, and that it's thick enough, and that it can hold people. And we have ways to do that, drilling through the ice, making sure it's thick. And then this is sea ice, and this is probably could be first year sea ice, but it's lasted through the summer, and we land on it. The landing itself is quite easy because the sea ice is fairly low to you don't have to climb up onto land, so to speak. And it's just an incredible experience. It really is, just to have real sea ice below your feet. It's a great platform for wildlife as well. We often see seals and seabirds flying around. And of course, we're always on the lookout for polar bears. And we'd leave the ice flow pretty quickly if a polar bear started to approach us, that's for sure. But one quick thing I did want to bring up, and that is just that sea ice is kind of a double-edged sword a little bit, in that it does limit our navigation and makes navigation potentially more difficult if the more sea ice you have. But on the other hand, it adds so much to the trip because wildlife often is associated with sea ice. You'll see a polar bear on an ice floe, for example, or maybe a seal hauled out, um, maybe an ivory gull flying around, or something like that. So it's kind of it's the optimum situation is to have kind of a nice balance where you've got some sea ice, but not enough to impede your navigation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because, of course, we have these sailings, 2 sailings a year, and one of the questions, pre-questions, is what's the best time to go? Our trips are timed to be the optimal time with the lowest average ice concentrations to make a safe passage through from east to west or west to east, and that's based on the timing. We monitor that ice breakup every year to check the routes, and Alex mentioned our preferred route that we take, but some years we make a deviation to go through. So it does vary, and as John said, as one of the things with climate change and global warming is we say there's a lot less ice. Yes, there may be a lot. There's some years there may be less ice, some years there may be more, some years it may be far more moving around and cause other problems with choking up channels. So the ice and the passage through is still a challenge and something we keep to. And of course, Amundsen and Nansen are ice strengthened vessels, so built for the purpose of exploration in these regions.
Peter, can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, of course, Alex. Yeah.
I just want to say I think it's for me the reverence that we have for our navigators and that long legacy of maritime excellence really comes to life here in this destination. You mentioned the ships, but I just have to spend a moment on our navigators, our captains, the crew members on board that carry us through routes like this just so gracefully. The people on this call are well informed. They may know there's other companies that offer Northwest Passage trips, but if you look closely, there are many who don't necessarily have the gumption to attempt a full transit. They're into the Northwest Passage, or discovering the Northwest Passage, or the gates of the Northwest Passage. Just kind of poke their nose into that eastern frontier. But the name of our trip is the Northwest Passage. From start to finish, the way it was always intended, the truly authentic version of the route itself, which I think is a really important distinction.
And one of the things, one of the questions is, what's best, east or west? And I think they both offer. You're doing the same transit, obviously, but they both offer a different, the way the voyage builds from the changes in topography, the visiting the communities and the sites. So. There's, and we'll talk about the gateways shortly. But I think there's those sort of questions and the timing. We mentioned in terms of the onboard activities, where what we do, but we have a big expedition team, we have a big team of cultural ambassadors, we have purpose-built science centres, so we really keep you more than busy on board. You can dip in and out along with the sort of relaxed living of the 3 dining options of the restaurants, gym and everything, depending on if you're into that type of stuff. So plenty to do when you're on board. We will have guest scientists on board, the citizen science program, so very much get you engaged and immersed in the education of the Northwest Passage. In terms of the getting to and from, we kind of forget when we go to the gateway ports that we think, oh, you're still in civilization. But Alex, you've been working a lot, particularly with Nuuk. Do you want to tell us a bit about the gateways?
Yeah, so our voyage is from 2025 and beyond. Either start or finish in Nuuk, Greenland, or Nome, Alaska. Nuuk has just gone through a major transformation as the capital of Greenland. They've opened a new airport, which actually happened on my birthday a few weeks ago, when Gebhard and our CEO, Gebhard Reiner, there pictured in the local news, making a prominent appearance in the Greenlandic news, just showing the level of integration that we as a company have with this destination. We were the only expedition cruise company present for this event, invited as kind of distinguished guests alongside, prime ministers of Greenland, prime ministers of Denmark, and other foreign dignitaries. And it just shows how much we appreciate the partnerships that we have. In the bottom left there, you have Lali, who's our representative, who lives in Nuuk. She grew up in Nuuk. She's Greenlandic. And so we consider the guest experience from end to end, and getting to and from these fantastic adventures gracefully is something that's really important. On the Alaskan side, we work with Alaskan Airways that returns you safely and comfortably to Seattle at the end of the voyage, so you can catch ongoing flights to wherever it is you're heading.
I know certainly, when John and I went through in 2019, and I disembarked in Nome, and he sort of, it's a real frontier town. There's no, the Iditarod, Spain's by the Iditarod dog race and gold prospecting, and it's really, you're really out there. I got off the ship, and it was a really sort of one had this, sort of overcome with emotion, having completed the Northwest Passage and realizing what we'd just done, but then also being in Nome as such a historic place as well, as really special. So we're coming towards an end now of the presentation. So continue your questions in, and we'll bring those. Of course, we do have, I was going to say not as always, but we do have offers on. We do very much feel this is really a once in a lifetime journey, and we feel that we're very competitive in the market. Offers are, of course, listed on the website, and I'm sure you're all up to date with those. One of the questions we have had consistently in the pre-webinar ask is about single supplements. There are deals to be had, so please look into those. And also, we recommend booking and having a look at our price promise. Book and get the cabins you want and move into that. The contact details for our different markets, I'm sure you have all these, but of course we have teams there ready and available to take your questions and help. And hopefully this webinar has given you a bit more of an insight from particularly John and Alex, the Canadian locals, experts, and a bit of my insight. But I'll ask Jesse to come into the call and then lead us through some questions that either see what's been coming through in the chat, Jesse.
Thank you very much, Tudor. Lots of good questions in the chat. We'll start with the most relevant ones to everyone. How would you describe the weather throughout the Northwest Passage in terms of temperature, wind conditions, how they might want to pack to prepare for that?
Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I can comment on it quickly. If let's say we start from Greenland, and one thing you'll notice right away is Greenland at that time of year is a lot warmer than you maybe expected, even though it has this huge ice sheet right behind you. It's that coast is influenced by a warm water current, so it's relatively warm and can be very pleasant. Then when you cross Baffin Bay into the Northwest Passage, again going from east to west, you notice quite a change. The weather, the temperatures get cooler, and you feel a bit of dampness. You're on the water after all, but the combination of the coolness and the dampness does give it, even though you're in the middle of the summer in the Arctic, it can be cool. So we have lots of recommendations for how you dress on our website, and it's all about layers, and you'll be fine. But once you get into the Northwest Passage as well, I think we might have mentioned it before, but it does become quite calm in there because you're in amongst the Arctic archipelago. the land gives you a lot of lee in terms of the wind. So the ice, if you have lots of sea ice or some sea ice, it will tend to calm the waters down as well. So it can be a little rough going across to Greenland and going across Baffin Bay, but once you get into the Northwest Passage, it's pretty calm.
Yeah, pretty calm. Yeah, and
All
one of
right.
the I'll come to you. One of the questions people ask: what's the temperature on board? And we've had that in every webinar we've done. On board, it is super comfortable. Depending on who's in the engine control room, it varies between 20 and 22 Celsius, which is around 70 Fahrenheit. So on board, it is inside. Obviously, it's pretty consistent. But people, the other thing that we recommend is when you're preparing to go out on a nature landing or into a community, going out on deck first to get a feel of the temperature is a really good way of seeing what the conditions are for the day. Alex.
I was just going to add, there's a lot of well-traveled people on this call, and compared to other destinations in our portfolio, I'd say the Northwest Passage is far from the most extreme. It's quite temperate. When you think about Svalbard in the early season and kind of May, or northern Norway in January, or even Antarctica, certainly on the beginning and the end of the season, that would be more cooler and kind of higher risk of inclement weather. Some of the pictures we showed are obviously from that destination, and you can get days of glorious sunshine when you're out on the tundra, just soaking it all in. So I'd say it's kind of mid-range for a polar destination.
Yeah.
And I think for the Arctic, you can get fog, which can feel cold. It gets into your bones. It's like being in the UK. It's yeah. So you get that variety, but it's not extreme at all. Back to you, Jesse.
Still a proper adventure then. All right. So one quick point of clarification, a few people were interested in. You guys are using the term prospective guests. Could you just clarify what that means?
So the aim of this webinar was to come to people that were interested in coming to the Northwest Passage. So our past guests, but they're prospectively interested in joining us on a trip in the Northwest Passage. So it's hence you haven't been. Well, maybe if you have, then please come again. But
okay. So we are referring to everyone in the room on the webinar, not some
everybody on the
mythical
call.
abstract entity. Okay, fantastic. Now, when it comes to landings and excursion operations, is there anything new or different past guests can expect, like limitations on passengers or at landing sites and things like that?
No, I'd say the difference is that there's a very distinct human history dimension that's probably often unexpected. There's been different eras of kind of human relationship, from the ancient Thule and Dorset cultures of some artifacts still remain that we can interact with, to the explorers like Franklin at Beechey Island. You have very well preserved artifacts from that expedition, to the Hudson's Bay Company, to the RCMP, and then of course the communities themselves. So some of the landing sites have these features, which are probably a little bit better preserved than in other places in some cases. And then as far as the actual structure of the excursions, it's very similar to what you might expect elsewhere. Great opportunities for walks. You're not constrained by glaciation like you are in Antarctica. And we also offer kayaking and small boat cruising, science activities, and the usual expansive portfolio of HX programming.
Now, would this be a lot of, thank you, Alex. But to take that a step further, are there, how to phrase this? What would you say the ratio of nature landings, wet landings, jetty landings there would be? Is it mostly wet landings? Are there jetties that we go to, dry landings?
There are very few jetties. I'll get John to keep me honest, but I think throughout the route, once you've left Greenland, there's Pond Inlet just installed a new little small boat harbor. And I think that's the only dryish landing you get. So it's really out there on the frontier. The communities have sheltered bays. A lot of the landing sites have been really well researched. Because of the protection of the islands, you don't get waves or a lot of bumpiness. But I'll pass over to John to fill that out.
Yeah, absolutely. You covered it well, Alex. I will mention you were talking about heritage sites that we visit, and I did want to mention that that we actually are obliged to have an archaeologist on board and to visit these sites, and they are special people. They tend to be Canadian, and they have to be acceptable to the government of Nunavut in terms of their credentials. And we go through a permitting process. We need lots of permits to do what we do in the Arctic, but that's an important one, is the archaeology permit. So it doesn't really restrict what we do on shore, but we have to manage the landing a little bit different at heritage sites to make sure that we are sensitive to the value of the sites in terms of heritage and culture of people in the north. So, and that's done through our archaeologists. So it's great person to have on board, great staff member, great resource person. And often the archaeologist tends to be a really nice bridge with the Inuit we have on board as well, because there's a lot of commonalities in terms of their interest in history and culture.
I can imagine
And I think
the archaeologist is one of the busier people on board.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of all the sailings we do, the complexity of permitting permitting compliance to conduct these voyages is probably it's the most complex voyage that we do in terms of permissions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a limit to how many people can be on a landing site, similar to Antarctica?
There's not, but we do like other sites, we do rotate round because we want to give everyone a really good experience. So we will tend to stay in places and rotate people to make sure they get the best experience from the landing.
Yeah.
So
in communities, we work out a landing plan with the local people in the community, and sometimes they say, bring everybody ashore as fast as you can. That will make us happy. So in that case, we do that. But as Tudor said, nature landings to manage the impact on the environment, I think we do reduce the numbers on ashore. Yeah.
And again, it's part of IECO. We're working with the industry association IECO, and as part of that, we're managing the numbers ashore. So we don't go above 100.
Okay,
at any time in a nature. Yeah.
John, you would say the community response to us all coming ashore like that is rather positive?
It is, because I mean we are at their mercy in the sense of what they want, they get. And we don't make any demands. We have a certain number of people that we would like to get ashore in a certain length of time. Usually it's 6 to 8 hours in a community. And so once we have those parameters set, then we know how many people can come ashore. And like I said, often they're absolutely prepared for us. And we're not the only ships that visit the communities. Some have lots of visits, Pond Inlet in particular. Joe Haven might have 20 visits a year, give or take. So they're certainly used to it, and they have infrastructure to look after us.
Excellent.
Can I just bring in again one of the questions that came through in the pre questions, which I thought was a really good question. They said, how safe is it and how deep is the water? Because of course, one of the things is is very well known for the Franklin ships and the wrecks of the Erebus and Terror. And part of that, there are areas that are shallow, but they are quite well they're mapped, and the shipping corridors are very well charted. So it's certainly somewhere, and Alex brought in about the skill of our navigators. You certainly want to be there with people that know what you're doing and those navigational aids. But yeah, it's those channels are well charted and safe.
Right. So their biggest concern is just how close are their binoculars to at any given moment.
Yeah.
All right. So when it comes to excursions and science projects, is there any difference? Anything that would be on an eastbound or westbound and not the other when prospective guests are trying to decide which direction to go?
In terms of our citizen science projects, they're consistent across. So the ones that we get the science coordinators on board lead with our guests to run, they're the same. Our guest scientists will definitely be different because you can't get the same person on each ship, on both ships. And we've been working on projects, and I know there's still a work in progress for next season, but looking at harmful algal blooms. So really looking at the plankton in the water and the water quality. So that's definitely a project we're looking at. And that's one that we've been running in Alaska, but we're extending around into the Beaufort Sea and beyond. So there's quite a lot of projects in the footing, but again, the actual guest scientists on board will be the projects will be different eastbound and westbound.
Okay.
But there will still be projects and guest scientists.
Okay. About how long before a voyage would a guest be able to inquire what the project might be?
We'd love to do this years out, but science institutions and scientists don't work like that. So Verena, our chief scientist, has a work cut out to it's amazing, get people locked in to commit to those times. But definitely we're sort of we're aiming for a 6-month lead time in, but again that changes quite closer to as well. So it's better for us not to promise a particular person on a particular voyage because we don't want to.
And well, with the best time to book being now, really, it's just know that you're going to get something good, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So here's a fun question. Where do we refuel?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah.
It's actually one of the logistical complications because there is no refueling facilities in northern Canada for a ship of our size or the ship sizes that exist throughout the expedition fleet. So we'll bunker fuel usually in Nuuk or Sisimiut on the Greenlandic side, or Seward or Dutch Harbor on the Alaskan side, and our ships. One of the things that enables us to do what we do is the autonomy that our ships are designed to have, the ability to operate independently for many weeks at a time. So we're out on the frontier.
And it's not just the fossil fuel, but the fuel to feed you all. So again, provisioning everything. It's and one of the questions we had before, why is it so expensive? It is a really complex sailing. It is a really complex sailing, whether it be for missions, provisioning, fuel, and we mentioned the gateway ports. They're gateways, but they're really out there as well in the frontiers. So this is a really special voyage, and it's complex to run and operate.
It's quite long too.
Yeah,
24
it's a long
days.
voyage. Yeah.
But
good question.
When it comes to the local communities, is it okay to bring any supplies? Is there any supplies guests could or should bring? Keeping in mind their remoteness and difficult access to certain things?
If anything, I would say, by traveling with HX, you can have the peace of mind that comes with the foundation that we run when it comes to kind of philanthropic and that kind of giving. But the advice that I would give to people, especially as we look to facilitate more personalized connections, is if you're going to bring something that's meaningful to you, something that represents where you're from. That's more of an educational or cultural exchange rather than a kind of a functional item. Because you'll make contacts, you'll get into conversations with people. It's quite probable they might share something with you, and having something to reciprocate. I mean, my wife's from Australia. So I always recommend when we're traveling the north to bring a thing of Vegemite or something like that is meaningful to her and provides a unique experience for those she's interacting with along the way. What would you say, John?
That brought up an idea of the art. I'm sure many people are aware of this, but the arts and craft culture in the Arctic is incredible. There are some very famous places. such as Cape Dorset or Kingaite, where they have this amazing printmaking industry. But many places, all places, all communities we visit have a very vibrant arts and craft culture. So, and they are very interested in selling their very high quality goods to you. So, bring your Canadian dollars. Good advice.
Yeah, and we're almost at an hour, but we understand we've got some really good questions, so we'll keep on going.
Yeah.
We're aware that those listening,
Yeah.
we're taking up your time, but
We
yeah,
do
we've got
have
good questions,
some really
so
good
we're
questions
good to
still to
keep on
go.
going. Yeah.
So I think, Alex, I think you might be able to help us with this one. Is there a reason we switched to Seattle from Vancouver?
Yes, it's called Alaskan Airlines, and combined with some renovation plans that the Vancouver airport has in store, we wanted to kind of protect and preserve the integrity of the commitments we make when we take our products to market, and reduce any potential impact that those might have. So, yeah, it's more streamlined flying out of Seattle for the airline. It helps reduce costs a little bit for our guests, not having to reposition those aircraft. And yeah, I'd just go back to that resilience, because if you have an airline that's worried about renovations and also inconvenienced by repositioning, Alaskan Airlines are very happy to fly out of Seattle, and will be doing so for many, many years to come. So
Excellent.
we're following that.
All right. So we've got a couple of tough questions, save them for last. With Northwest Passage being so remote, similar to Antarctica, how do we handle medical emergencies?
Good question. We actually had a minor medical emergency last summer. When we were in Pond Inlet, a crew member fell ill, and it was fantastic watching the team come to life. I think within a few hours, they were checked into the medical clinic there with the support of our local representative, Mariah, and there was a medical flight that came from Iqaluit a few hours after that. So throughout these communities, I mean, they're very adequately served by a medical infrastructure. There's a fleet of aircraft that can help get people into or out of the communities. And although it's quite remote compared to other destinations, there is great support if we should need it. So yeah, I wouldn't be concerned
Excellent.
about that. And I've had the experience of witnessing some really well orchestrated responses, and keeping people happy and healthy along the way without interrupting the journey too much.
Excellent.
It is, yeah, sorry, Tudor. I just wanted to say it is one of our destinations that we do require all our guests to have a medical certificate or something filled in by their doctor, eh?
I believe we've actually waived that for Northwest Passage, since we have
Oh, okay.
proven that we can get help fast.
Oh, okay. Oh, very good. Yeah.
It's relegated only to Antarctica, because obviously help
Right.
is a long way off down there.
Yeah. And the Canadian government plays a role as well, because if a serious
Now, if you are booking,
needed,
always be sure to check every email that we send you. Things like that can change. Requirements can change. Everything's flexible and always in motion. But at the moment, we're not requiring one for the Northwest Passage any longer.
I was going to say that the Canadian infrastructure, provides a backup and support. Obviously, we try and aim to be self-sufficient and not put a strain on the communities. But yeah, compared with Antarctica, where there is no infrastructure, then we are lucky, or we're well served, but with the Canadian infrastructure, if needed in worst case. Yeah.
Okay, so that takes care of sort of a tough safety question. Let's move to a tough sustainability question. Do we know the average carbon footprint of our passengers on a full ship?
We do. We calculate it, and we actually publish it in we call it our ESG report, which stands for Environment, Social and Governance. And we calculate it it's actually calculated per available passenger cruise night. So the same as an airline does. And that's published and available in our ESG report, which is online. And we also publish in there our waste figures, our food waste, use of water, all sort of key indicators that are measured in terms of the sustainability field. And transparency is really important for us, and being able to show those figures. And also, if you want to see the impact or that you're having on in terms of fuel usage, then that's all there for everyone and the world to see. So yeah, if you look at our ESG report, and we publish those annually, publish them in April for the previous year.
Yeah. And there's a lot of external ratings that have validated this. We're consistently winning awards. We're proud to have led the way in this area. There's actually only one other company in our industry which has published similar metrics, and side by side, our emissions are 50% lower than theirs, and we hope that other companies will follow suit and share those disclosures.
All right. That's good news. Excellent. And for anyone actually interested in checking out that ESG report, if you scroll to the bottom of any of our web pages, all the way down to the black area full of links, on the right-hand side, I believe it is a link for the Hurtigruten Group. That will take you to all sorts of fascinating information about the company.
Policies and all sorts.
That's one of my favorite pages.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So that's sustainability. Let's go on to a tough operational question. What are the odds that that we cannot complete the actual passage, and what happens then?
Do you want me to start, and I'll let you guys chip in? So,
I got an answer,
yeah, part of any voyage is the planning, and particularly with the Northwest Passage sailing, the planning for the ice conditions of that year. The challenge with this particular voyage is when the breakup happens is very close, usually, to departure time. So it's that balance of looking ahead. We did in 2018. We weren't planning to do a complete transit, but we were, as Alex was saying, we were playing around in the east, and we played around in the east a bit more than we had planned because of the ice. So it's about that planning. Worst case scenario, we do have Plan B and Plan C sort of itineraries in the back drawer if we do need to make a change, and that's the same with any expedition sailing. So it is about that timing and bringing in those ice things, as John mentioned. It's a double-edged sword. We've been fortunate and touch wood and continue since 2019. Obviously, we had a bit of a enforced break with COVID, but we've been successful on our transits since 2019.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the Canadian Coast Guard runs an icebreaker program in the Arctic in the summertime. And they move down to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the St. Lawrence Seaway in the wintertime. And that's a free service, believe it or not. So Alex and I pay for it in our taxes.
Yes.
I think we were escorted. We didn't really need to be tutored, but I think we did follow an icebreaker back in 2019, just through the toughest part of the Northwest Passage, which is just north of Joe Haven and east of Cambridge Bay. There's a little sort of area there called Larson Sound that breaks up really quite late. So there is that fallback as well.
Yeah. Alex, do you want to add any more? Or?
I don't know, I was going to say that's well covered. My team are responsible for our advanced itinerary planning, and so we look at all this. Since I've been paying attention, which is almost 20 years, I think there's 1 year where there were significant enough ice conditions that interrupted operations. And part of what we do is to mitigate any risks associated with that. Most of the time, it just requires ships to slow down and go more carefully through the ice, which is a great experience for the guests, by the way. They love it. It's a real sense of adventure. And we build in a few days of buffer that if we need that, then we have that extra time and we're not rushed. We can still complete all of our objectives. And in recent years, certainly last year, we actually didn't need that time, so we essentially gained a few days to do further explorations and excursions on shore than we had originally intended.
And hence the departure time for these voyages are relatively close because those potential pinch points that break up late. So it's sort of in the planning and keeping an eye on it.
And I think in the itinerary, the two ships meet or at least cross somewhere around Joe Haven or somewhere like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of neat.
All right, so that's the tough questions. We've had a couple more come in. I'm just gonna grab them real quick, and then we're gonna have to start wrapping it up. Do we we did mention it already, but what we mentioned it sort of in passing. What sort of archaeological Viking sites would we visit?
Okay. I mean, we there are some putative Viking sites on the east coast of Baffin Island, but the Vikings probably didn't get into the Northwest Passage. So our heritage sites mainly are either fairly recent Hudson Bay Company, Royal Canadian Mounted Police outposts, trading posts, that sort of thing. But usually in those areas, there will be evidence of earlier habitation in the form of tent rings from the Thule culture, which would be around 800 years ago, and even older areas in some places. Are there any others? I'm a bit rusty on the heritage sites that we visit, but
I'd say some of those associated with the Franklin expedition and
exactly, yeah,
and the European explorers who came to his aid or attempted to come to his aid. You get some of those are designated. And one thing I just want to go back to, we spoke about restrictions around archaeology. I actually consider, if you look at it the other way around, is by having an archaeologist, you can go to all these fantastic places and get to interact with history in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. That's a great perspective on that. So my next question, very important question, affects everyone really. When it comes to the Northwest Passage, are there more opportunities for kayaking as opposed to, say, Antarctica?
I would say yes, but the trip is longer. I mean, that's and even if you were to take a comparable trip, Tudor, you and John are the experts here, but if you took a Fram trip to Falklands, South Georgia, and the Peninsula, or a Northwest Passage trip, I'd say it's probably equal or greater the number of opportunities you can have in the Northwest Passage.
I'd say it's probably equal because it is, it is a long journey, so that movement from east to west or west to east. So there certainly are opportunities, and usually most people that want to go kayaking, you either go at least once. So those opportunities are definitely there. Yes.
The other thing I'll say as a contrast to Antarctica, especially as it relates to kayaking, is kayaking or small boat cruising in Antarctica can be a real highlight because of the density of wildlife, the penguins and the ice flows. Whereas in the Northwest Passage, those activities are for people who are more focused on, who have a existing interest in kayaking and kind of the heritage of it, because the landscapes are bigger, they're more vast, and so you tend to have people trend towards the land-based excursions, and the kayaking excursions, while available and abundant, are less popular than I think in the Antarctic Peninsula.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Excellent. So, really good chances for kayaking once, if not twice, in the Northwest Passage, especially with calmer sea conditions. All right, so that's just about going to wrap it up for us. I do have one more somewhat of a fun question for you.
The final fun one.
Yeah. For those past passengers with lofty aspirations and lots of passion, what are the first steps to becoming an expedition team member with HX?
I love it. First steps is to apply. No, there are opportunities, and I think there's opportunities. A lot, as most of you have sailed with us. A lot of our staff are permanent, but we do have a staff that do a few trips and are experts in particular places. so that there are opportunities. And but of course, I think quite a lot of people want to do it. And I would say, having worked as expedition team, it's hard work. So Alex and John have it as well.
Exactly.
But no, it's good, and it's I think whenever I go to these places, I'm always fortunate. Whether we're taking there working as expedition team, it's fantastic to be part of the journey.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
Great.
that wraps it up for me in the Q&A, because I do believe we need to start wrapping this up. We've already gone over quite a bit.
Yeah.
And
okay, so
for any
I'll
questions that didn't get answered, specifically, I will try to answer you directly in the next couple of days. So jam them in there real quick right now if you have them, and I'll try to get to them afterwards. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, guys.
Brilliant. And thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Olga and Verena, and Ollie and Lee have been in the background, also facilitating and helping us. Thanks very much, John and Alex. It's been great having these sort of conversations with you. Brilliant. And thank you, everybody in the call, for listening. There will be a survey coming out shortly afterwards. If you'd be great when this call finishes, if you could just quickly fill that in and give us some feedback so we can improve. We're trying to raise the bar and answer as many of your questions before. So please do give us the feedback. And we very much hope to see you on a Northwest Passage sailing in the future. And have a great time, and wish you all a brilliant festive season. Thank you very much.
A lot of fun. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
With that, we'll conclude our webinar now. Thank you all so much. Goodbye.